Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of Meriwether County, Georgia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard the story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. In the sweltering summer of 1891, a peculiar silence descended upon the Macabre Plantation in Meriwether County, Georgia. The property, with its imposing Greek Revival mansion, perched atop a gentle hill overlooking acres of cotton fields, had been the subject of whispers throughout the county for decades. Locals avoided the winding dirt road that led to its gates, and even during the plantation's most prosperous years, merchants from nearby towns would leave deliveries at the edge of the property rather than approach the main house. But it wasn't until August of that year that anyone thought to document what transpired within the plantation's walls. It began when Josiah Montgomery, a land surveyor from Atlanta, was commissioned to map the neighboring property lines following decades of boundary disputes. His first impression of the Hargrove estate was recorded in a journal entry dated August 12, 1891, approached the Hargrove estate today. Though the house commands an impressive view, there is something decidedly unsettling about it. The facade, once white, has acquired a yellowish tinge, as if the very paint is slowly decaying. The 6 massive columns supporting the upper balcony appear solid from a distance, but upon closer inspection show hairline fractures spiraling upward. Most curious, however, is the brick foundation. I have never seen such precisely laid bricks, each one seemingly fitted to the next with almost no mortar visible between them. The effect is unsettling, as if the house is made of one continuous surface rather than individual components. When I placed my palm against the foundation wall, I experienced the most peculiar sensation, a slight vibration, almost imperceptible, as if something within the brick was stirring. Most disconcerting of all, the longer I stood before the house, the more convinced I became that its proportions were somehow wrong. The distance between windows slightly irregular, the height of the first floor inconsistent when viewed from different angles. I find myself both repelled by and drawn to this structure in equal measure. Montgomery's observations, while seemingly innocuous, would later be regarded as the first documented account of the architectural anomalies that defined the Hargrove Plantation. The property had been established in 1835 by Silas Hargrove, a cotton merchant from Savannah who had amassed considerable wealth through trade with European textile manufacturers. According to county records preserved in the Meriwether Historical Society archives, Silas purchased 200 acres of prime agricultural land with the intention of creating one of the most productive cotton plantations in western Georgia. Construction of the main house began in 1838 and was completed in 1841, an unusually long period for a structure of its size and relative simplicity. What made the construction process so protracted was not immediately clear from historical records, but personal correspondence between Silas and various contractors sheds some light on the matter. Silas dismissed no fewer than 3 different building crews during the initial phase of construction, citing incompetence and failure to follow specifications. In a letter to his brother dated June 1839, he wrote, "I have been forced yet again to remove workers from the construction of our home. These local tradesmen claim expertise, yet when confronted with the particular requirements of our foundation, they balk like frightened horses. I have secured the services of a mason from abroad, one Ambrose Thorne, recently arrived from Europe, who claims familiarity with the techniques I require. His references are impeccable, though his demeanor is admittedly peculiar. He speaks little, observes much, and has the most unsettling gaze I have ever encountered in a man. Nevertheless, his understanding of masonry is profound, and he has agreed to oversee the construction of the foundation and load-bearing walls personally. Ambrose Thorne remains something of an enigma in the historical record. Immigration documents indicate he arrived in Savannah from an unspecified European port in early 1839. His country of origin was never clearly stated, though several accounts describe his accent as Eastern European or possibly Russian. What made Thorne's methods unusual was not immediately apparent to observers. The mason insisted on mixing his own mortar using a formula he refused to divulge to anyone, including Silas himself. Witnesses describe the substance as having an unusual reddish hue when wet, though it dried to a color indistinguishable from the bricks themselves. More peculiar still was Thorne's insistence that all construction on the foundation take place only between midnight and dawn. This eccentricity was noted in the personal correspondence of Silas's wife, Millicent, who wrote to her sister in Charleston in July 1839, "The mason Silas has hired is unlike any tradesman I have ever encountered. He works only in darkness, claiming the moonlight allows him to better see the true nature of his materials. The workers tasked with assisting him have begged to be reassigned, claiming the man mutters continuously in a language none can identify. Even more disturbing, they insist that the mortar he uses contains substances beyond the usual lime and sand. Though what these might be, none can say with certainty. One house servant claimed to have observed Thorne adding what appeared to be blood to his mixture, though Silas dismissed this as superstitious nonsense. I find myself unable to look directly at the foundation walls when passing. There is something in their perfect uniformity that disturbs the eye and mind alike." By early 1840, the brick foundation and first-floor walls were complete. According to Hargrove's financial ledgers, Thorne was paid a substantial sum for this phase of the work, nearly triple the standard rate for masonry work of that scale. Following completion of the brick portions of the house, Thorne's direct involvement ceased, though he remained on the property as a consultant until the structure was completed in late 1841. Curiously, there is no record of Thorne's departure or subsequent activities. The last mention of him in any document is a brief note in Silas Hargrove's journal dated November 17, 1841. Thorne completed final inspection of the masonry work today. He expressed satisfaction with how the structure has taken hold, to an odd phrase that I take to mean the house has settled properly on its foundation. He departs tomorrow, his work here complete. Silas and Millicent Hargrove moved into the house in December of that year, along with Silas's younger brother Winston and Millicent's cousin Adelaide, who served as a companion to the mistress of the house. For the next 17 years, the plantation prospered, producing cotton yields that consistently exceeded those of neighboring properties. Silas expanded his holdings, eventually controlling nearly 3 cerebro acres and employing over 150 enslaved workers in the fields and house. The Hargrove family became prominent in local society, hosting elaborate balls and dinners that drew attendees from as far away as Atlanta and Savannah. Yet even during this period of apparent success, there were indications that all was not well within the Hargrove household. Visitors frequently commented on the unusual chill that permeated the house even in the hottest summer months. Several guests noted in their correspondence that they had been unable to sleep during their stays, disturbed by what one visitor described as a persistent scratching sound, as if something were moving within the walls themselves. Most telling were the accounts from those who worked in the house. While no direct testimony from the enslaved house servants exists in the historical record, interviews conducted with their descendants in the 1930s as part of the Federal Writers Project provide some insight. Hester Johnson, whose grandmother had served as a housemaid at the Hargrove Plantation, recalled, "My granny wouldn't never talk much about that place. Said the walls had ears there, and not just for listening. Said they had appetites, too. Told me once how she'd been sweeping the hall when she seen the bricks in the wall sort of ripple, like the surface of a pond when you throw in a stone, said she went up to touch it and felt something pushing back, like the wall was breathing. After that, she would never turn her back on the walls in that house, always kept her eye on them while she worked. Said Ms. Hargrove used to do the same thing, always watching them walls like she expected them to move. It was in 1858 that the first written reports of peculiarities within the house began to emerge from a primary source. Millicent Hargrove, in her household journal, made increasing reference to what she described as movements within the walls. Initially attributed to the settling of the structure or the presence of rodents, these disturbances gradually took on a more specific character in her writings. April 17, 1858. I am convinced now that what I hear is not the scurrying of mice or the natural groaning of timber. There is a deliberate quality to the sounds, as if something is slowly adjusting its position. Most troubling is that these movements seem to follow the presence of people in rooms. When Silas and I retire to the drawing room in the evening, it is not until we have been seated for several minutes that the faint shifting begins in the wall behind us. The sound follows us from room to room, always manifesting in the wall nearest to where people are gathered. I have not shared these observations with Silas, who would surely dismiss them, but I have noticed that he, too, has begun to glance nervously at the walls when he believes no one is watching. By the summer of 1859, Millicent's journal entries had become increasingly erratic. She described waking in the night to find what appeared to be subtle alterations in the dimensions of her bedroom. Doorways that seemed narrower in the morning than they had been the previous evening. Windows that appeared to have migrated several inches from their original positions. Most disturbing were her descriptions of the brick walls in the cellar, which she claimed exhibited changes in their pattern when examined closely over time. June 22, 1859. I have taken to marking the position of particular bricks with small dots of paint, visible only if one knows where to look. Yesterday, I placed such a mark on a distinctive brick with a slight chip on its corner, located in the east wall of the cellar, third row from the floor, 17th brick from the corner. Today I cannot locate this brick, though I have examined every inch of the wall. It is as if the walls are slowly rearranging themselves when no one is watching. More disturbing still, I have noticed that the overall dimensions of the cellar appear to have changed. The distance from the base of the stairs to the far wall has increased by approximately 2 feet, since I began measuring it 3 weeks ago. Yet the exterior dimensions of the house remain unchanged. How can a space expand internally without affecting its external boundaries? I feel as though I am losing my grip on rationality, yet my measurements do not lie. During this period, Winston Hargrove, who occupied the east wing of the house, began to complain of unusual dreams in which he found himself lost in an endlessly expanding maze of brick corridors. In letters to a friend in Charleston, he described waking to find himself standing before his bedroom wall, pressing his ear against the brick as if listening for a voice from within. Winston, who had initially scoffed at his sister-in-law's concerns about the house, gradually became a convert to her perspective. In a journal entry dated October 1859, he wrote, "I no longer doubt Millicent's assertions regarding the walls. Last night I observed with my own eyes the shifting of the bricks in my bedchamber. It was subtle at first, a barely perceptible movement, as if the wall were breathing shallowly. But as I watched, the movement became more pronounced. Individual bricks seemed to slide against one another, changing their arrangement while maintaining the structural integrity of the wall. Most disturbing was the realization that the new pattern formed what appeared to be a crude representation of a human face, a single staring eye, a gaping mouth. I watched transfixed until dawn, by which time the wall had returned to its normal appearance. But I know what I saw, and I shall not sleep with my back to that wall again." The house tutor, Jeremy Collins, who maintained his own journal during his employment at the plantation, also noted strange occurrences. In an entry from September 1859, he wrote, "The Hargroves have developed the most peculiar habit of pressing their ears against the walls at odd moments, as if listening for something within. When questioned about this behavior, they offered no explanation, merely exchanging glances among themselves before changing the subject. Mrs. Hargrove, ordinarily the most composed of women, yesterday placed her hand against the dining-room wall and announced, 'It knows we're here.' When I asked what she meant, she replied, 'The house is counting us.' I would attribute such statements to imagination, were it not for the fact that I, too, have begun to feel a certain awareness emanating from the very structure around us. At times, particularly in the early morning hours, I find myself convinced that the house is somehow observing its occupants, evaluating us for some purpose I cannot fathom." Collins left his position at the Macabre Plantation in December 1859, citing health concerns. In a letter to a colleague the following year, he confessed that his departure had been motivated by an increasing certainty that the house itself harbored some malevolent intelligence, one that seemed to be slowly influencing the behavior and perception of all who dwelled within its walls. He noted that in the final weeks of his employment, he had begun to experience episodes of disorientation within the house, finding himself in rooms he had no recollection of entering, or suddenly realizing that he had been staring at a blank wall for extended periods without any awareness of the passage of time. Silas Hargrove dismissed both his wife's concerns and the tutor's departure as manifestations of overwrought imagination. In correspondence with his physician, he sought advice regarding what he termed female hysteria, requesting powders or tonics that might alleviate his wife's condition. The doctor, one Julian Pierce of Columbus, prescribed a regimen of rest and isolation, suggesting that Millicent be confined to her bedroom for periods of no less than 2 weeks at a time, with minimal stimulation or social interaction. This treatment continued intermittently for nearly 2 years, during which time Millicent's journal entries ceased entirely. When they resumed in late 1862, her writing had changed dramatically. Gone were the frantic descriptions of moving walls and shifting dimensions. Instead, her entries became methodical, almost scientific in their precision, documenting daily temperatures, barometric pressure, and the phases of the moon. Interspersed among these observations were cryptic references to what she called the breathing of the house. November 3, 1862. The cycle has established itself clearly now. During the waxing moon, the house expands, imperceptibly to most, but measurable if one knows where to look. The distance from the baseboard to the first floor joist in the northeast corner of the drawing room has increased by 1/8 of an inch since last week. During the waning moon, contraction occurs. The pattern is undeniable. The house is respiring, drawing in and expelling something that is not air. I have learned that resistance is futile. The house will have its way. Better to understand than to oppose. Better to observe than to be observed. I have begun my own experiments in response. The nature of these experiments was not explicitly detailed in Millicent's journals, but subsequent entries suggest they involved methodical exploration of the house's anomalous properties. She began mapping what she referred to as thin places, locations within the house where the walls seemed most responsive to human proximity. She documented temperature variations that corresponded to no external weather patterns and areas where sound behaved in ways that defied normal acoustics. Most disturbing were her descriptions of the cellar, which she claimed was gradually developing features that had not been a part of the original construction. In an entry from February 1863, she wrote, "The northeast corner of the cellar now contains what appears to be a door, though it opens onto solid earth. The door frame has emerged gradually from the brick wall, becoming more defined with each passing week. The wood appears ancient, older than the house itself, with carvings in a script I cannot identify. Silas refuses to acknowledge its existence, walking past it as if it were not there, even when I stand directly before it and point. Winston, however, sees it clearly. He has taken to avoiding the cellar entirely, claiming that he hears voices whispering behind the door at night. I have not yet dared to open it, though last night I dreamed that I did, and found beyond it a vast chamber constructed entirely of brick, within which stood figures like statues, frozen in postures of supplication. The Civil War brought change to the Hargrove Plantation, as it did to all of Georgia. Silas, who had initially supported the Confederate cause with financial contributions, found his wealth dramatically reduced as the conflict progressed. Winston Hargrove enlisted in the Confederate Army in 1862, joining a Georgia infantry regiment. He was killed at the Battle of Antietam in September of that year. Another relative who had come to live with them, Millicent's nephew Harrison, survived until the Battle of Petersburg in 1865, just weeks before the war's end. By 1864, when General Sherman's troops were moving through Georgia on their infamous March to the Sea, the plantation's operation had been severely curtailed. Records indicate that many of the enslaved people had already fled, leaving only a handful of workers to maintain essential functions. Silas had become increasingly reclusive, spending most of his time in his study, obsessively reviewing the plantation's financial records as his fortune dwindled. Curiously, Sherman's forces bypassed the Hargrove estate entirely, despite burning many neighboring properties. A diary entry from a Union officer named Lieutenant Caleb Dennison, discovered in O Military Archive in 1932, provided a possible explanation for this oversight. April 14, 1864, approached a large plantation house today, situated on a hill about 3 miles east of our main line of march. I led a small detachment to assess the property for resources or military threat. Upon nearing the house, every man in my unit reported feeling a profound unease. 2 men became physically ill, vomiting without apparent cause. I myself experienced a sensation I can only describe as the opposite of welcome, a palpable repulsion emanating from the structure itself. The very air around the building seemed to thicken, as if resisting our approach. More disturbing still, I could have sworn that the facade of the house altered subtly as we watched, the windows shifting position like the features of a face rearranging themselves into an expression of hostility. We withdrew without making contact with any occupants, if indeed there were any. I cannot rationally explain our reaction, but I made the decision not to mark the property on our maps. Some places are better left undisturbed, even in times of war. After the war, the Hargrove family's fortunes continued to decline. Silas, who had invested heavily in Confederate bonds, was nearly destitute. The plantation continued to operate, but on a much reduced scale. By 1870, only the main house and 50 acres remained in Hargrove hands, the rest having been sold to cover debts. Silas died in 1872, reportedly from heart failure, though local rumors suggested suicide. The coroner's report, preserved in county records, noted several unusual aspects of Silas's death. His body was discovered in the cellar, positioned before the northeast wall, the same location where Millicent had described the appearance of a door. According to the report, Silas's fingertips were raw and bloody, as if he had been clawing at the brick wall. Most peculiar was the position of the body, described as rigidly upright, pressed against the wall, as if in the act of being absorbed by it. The official cause of death was listed as apoplexy, though the examining physician noted that the expression on Silas's face was one of utter terror, the eyes wide and fixed upon something in the middle distance, the mouth open in what appears to have been a final scream. Millicent continued to live in the house with a distant cousin, Thaddeus, who had returned from the war with a pronounced limp and a temperament marked by long periods of silence. Adelaide, who had been Millicent's companion for many years, had married a banker from Atlanta in 1866 and rarely returned to the plantation, writing to her cousin that she could not bring herself to enter the house again. Millicent's journal entries from this period reveal a woman who had reached an unusual accommodation with her surroundings. May 7, 1873. Thaddeus asked today why I do not leave this place given all that has occurred here. I could not adequately explain that the house and I have reached an understanding. It allows me certain freedoms in exchange for my attention to its needs. The pattern of bricks in the east cellar wall requires rearrangement every third day. The doors must all be opened precisely at dawn and closed at dusk. Small offerings of iron nails must be pressed into the mortar at each full moon. These rituals maintain the balance. Thaddeus does not understand, but he no longer questions. He has taken to sleeping in the stables rather than in his bedroom. He claims the sound of the horses comforts him, but I know the truth. He cannot bear the weight of the house's attention, the constant sensation of being observed by something that resides within the very walls. I have grown accustomed to it. Indeed, I have come to find a certain comfort in the house's watchfulness. One is never truly alone when one lives within a conscious dwelling. In 1875, Thaddeus Hargrove left the plantation, moving to Atlanta, where he established himself in the emerging railroad industry. According to letters he sent to Adelaide, he never spent another night under the roof of the Hargrove mansion, though he did occasionally visit his cousin during daylight hours. Records indicate he married in 1878 and had a family of his own, none of whom ever visited the Hargrove plantation. Millicent remained alone in the increasingly dilapidated mansion. Her journal entries continued, becoming more fragmented and interspersed with drawings of brick patterns and what appeared to be floor plans. Though of a house with impossible geometries, rooms that overlapped one another, hallways that bent at physically unachievable angles. She began to refer to the house as a living entity, describing conversations with it and recording what she claimed were its responses. September 15, 1879. The house speaks more clearly now, its voice emerging from the subtle shifting of brick against brick. It has shown me its true nature, revealed the vast chambers that exist within its walls, spaces that cannot possibly fit within the physical dimensions of the structure, yet which I have entered and explored. Time moves differently in these spaces. I spent what seemed like hours in the great domed room beyond the cellar door yesterday. Yet when I emerged, only moments had passed. The house is not merely a structure. It is a doorway, a threshold between our world and somewhere else. The bricks are not merely building materials. They are cells in a vast patient organism that has been growing for decades, and it hungers for completion. The final dated entry in Millicent's journal is from December 31st, 1880. It contains only a single line. The walls have accepted my proposal. Tomorrow I become part of the house in truth as well as in spirit. Millicent Hargrove was never seen again. When neighbors, concerned by the absence of smoke from the house's chimneys, investigated in early January 1881, they found the mansion empty. A search of the surrounding property revealed no trace of her. The local sheriff conducted a cursory investigation, but given Millicent's reputation for eccentricity and the lack of any evidence of foul play, the case was soon abandoned. Some speculated that she had finally left the plantation to join Thaddeus or Adelaide, though both denied having any knowledge of her whereabouts. The house stood vacant for the next decade, falling into greater disrepair. Local residents dared each other to approach the property, though few ventured beyond the outer gate. Those who did reported strange phenomena, the sensation of being watched, the sound of shuffling movements within the apparently empty structure, and, most frequently, the disturbing optical illusion that the house was subtly different each time it was viewed, as if gradually reshaping itself. In 1890, a wealthy lumber merchant from Ohio named Hiram Blackwell began acquiring large tracts of land in Meriwether County, including several properties adjacent to the Hargrove estate. Blackwell, who had never visited Georgia before his business ventures brought him south, was unaware of the plantation's reputation. In the summer of 1891, he commissioned a survey of his holdings, hiring Josiah Montgomery, a land surveyor from Atlanta, to establish the precise boundaries of his properties. This brings us back to Montgomery, whose observations in August 1891 marked the beginning of the most thoroughly documented period of strange occurrences at the Hargrove Plantation. Montgomery was instructed to survey the boundaries of all Blackwell's recent acquisitions, including those bordering the Hargrove estate. His journal entries describe an increasing fascination with the main house, particularly its brick foundation and lower walls. Montgomery spent several days surveying the boundaries of the estate. On his third day on the property, he recorded an unusual observation. August 15th, 1891. I have been staring at the foundation wall on the western side of the house for hours, attempting to understand the pattern of the brickwork. There is something mathematical about it that eludes conventional analysis. When I focus on any single brick, it appears normal, yet when I attempt to perceive the pattern as a whole, my vision seems to slide away, as if the wall is rejecting scrutiny. Most disturbing was my discovery this afternoon. I had been making detailed measurements of a section of wall when a brief rainfall interrupted my work. Upon returning, I found that the section I had been measuring had changed. The dimensions were identical, but the pattern of bricks was different. I verified this against my notebook sketches. There can be no mistake. The wall had rearranged itself during the 15 minutes I had taken shelter from the rain. Montgomery's journal indicates that he became increasingly obsessed with documenting these changes. He began spending nights on the property, sleeping in a tent positioned to allow observation of the house. On August 18th, he recorded witnessing activity that defied rational explanation. At approximately 3:17 a.m., I was awakened by what I initially took to be the sound of masonry work, the distinctive scrape of brick against brick. Emerging from my tent, I observed the moonlit facade of the house. What I saw cannot be accurately described, but I shall attempt it nevertheless. The bricks in the foundation wall were moving slowly and deliberately, shifting position like the blocks in a child's puzzle box. The movement was subtle at first, but as I watched, it became more pronounced. Individual bricks would extract themselves from their position and slide, seemingly of their own accord, to new locations. The pattern of the wall was transforming before my eyes, and yet the structural integrity remained unchanged. Most disturbing was the realization that the new pattern being formed was not random, but purposeful. The bricks were arranging themselves to form what appeared to be a crude representation of a human face in profile. I watched, transfixed, until dawn, by which time the wall had returned to its apparently normal state, though with an entirely different configuration than it had possessed the previous day. Montgomery, evidently disturbed by what he had witnessed, nevertheless returned to the property the following night. His entry from August 19th was brief but significant. The house is aware of me now. I observed no movement of bricks tonight, but instead heard what I can only describe as breathing emanating from the foundation, a slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction of the entire structure. More alarming still, I discovered this morning that the distance from my tent to the house had decreased by approximately 6 feet, though I am certain I did not relocate my camp. The house has moved closer to me. On August 20th, Montgomery's journal records his decision to enter the house itself, despite his growing apprehension. His description of the interior is valuable, as it represents the first documented account of the mansion's condition after a decade of abandonment. The entrance hall remains largely intact, though there is extensive water damage to the plaster ceiling. The grand staircase appears sound, despite a pronounced list to the right that I do not believe is a result of structural settling. The most remarkable feature of the interior is the brick wall at the rear of the entrance hall. According to the exterior dimensions of the house, this wall should mark the boundary of the central hallway, beyond which lie the dining room and kitchen. However, the wall itself is inconsistent with this floor plan. It curves in a way that suggests a much larger space behind it than the exterior dimensions of the house would allow. More curious still, the pattern of bricks in this wall exhibits the same mathematical quality I observed outside, a pattern that seems to shift when not directly observed. The drawing room to the right of the entrance hall appears normal at first glance, though the proportions feel slightly wrong, as if the room is subtly larger on the inside than its external boundaries would permit. The plaster walls show extensive cracking, beneath which can be seen the brick substrate. These exposed sections reveal that the unusual brickwork extends throughout the house, not merely in the foundation and cellar, as I had initially supposed. The dining room is perhaps the most unsettling space I have encountered thus far. The brick wall that forms its eastern boundary appears to bulge inward, creating a convex surface that defies architectural logic. More disturbing still, this bulge seems to have shifted position between my initial entry to the room and my examination of it 15 minutes later. I am certain that the protrusion was initially centered on the wall, yet when I turned to leave, it had migrated nearly 2 feet toward the southern corner. I cannot rationally explain this observation, yet I am certain of what I saw. While Montgomery proceeded to explore the upper floors, finding them largely unremarkable, save for one bedroom, which he identified as having likely belonged to Millicent Hargrove based on personal items found there. The room contained dozens of journals similar to the one discovered after her disappearance, all filled with the same combination of meticulous observations and increasingly abstract drawings of brick patterns. Montgomery noted that the floor of this room sloped at an unusual angle, and that none of the furniture appeared to be affected by this tilt. Each piece stood perfectly level, as if operating according to its own sense of gravity. Most significant was Montgomery's exploration of the cellar, accessed through a door beneath the main staircase. His description of this space occupies several pages of his journal, the handwriting becoming increasingly erratic as the account progresses. The cellar extends far beyond what the dimensions of the house should permit. I have paced the length and breadth of it and estimate it to be at least 3 times larger than the foundation footprint visible from outside. The brick walls here are unlike those in the rest of the house. They do not merely suggest movement, they are actively in motion, though so slowly that the change is only perceptible if one fixes a point of reference and observes for several minutes. The bricks slide past one another with a sound like distant breathing. In the northeast corner, I discovered what appears to be a doorway embedded in the brick wall, exactly as described in Millicent Hargrove's journal. The frame is constructed of a dark wood I cannot identify, covered in carvings that resemble writing in no language I recognize. The door itself stands slightly ajar, revealing only darkness beyond. When I attempted to shine my lantern through the opening, the light seemed to be absorbed entirely, illuminating nothing. Most disturbing is the rear wall of the cellar, which appears to have been partially dismantled to reveal a tunnel or passageway extending into the earth. The opening is roughly oval in shape, approximately 4 feet in height, and is lined with bricks arranged in a spiral pattern. The passage descends at a steep angle. I illuminated as much of it as my lantern would allow, but could see no end to it. A cool draft emanates from the opening, carrying with it an odor I can only describe as similar to freshly turned clay, though with metallic undertones. I confess that I lack the courage to explore this passage today. The sensation of being observed was overwhelming in the cellar, and increased dramatically as I approached the opening. I will return tomorrow with additional lanterns and perhaps more courage. Montgomery did indeed return to the cellar the following day, August 21st. His journal entry from this date is the last in the book. I am writing this from within the passage discovered yesterday. I have been descending for what I estimate to be 2 hours, though my pocket watch has stopped functioning, the hands frozen at 2:17. The passage continues to spiral downward, the brick walls giving way gradually to what appears to be natural stone, though with the same unsettling quality of subtle movement observed in the bricks above. The air has grown increasingly warm and damp. The most remarkable discovery is that the passage periodically opens into chambers of varying sizes. I have passed 3 such spaces thus far. Each is roughly circular and domed, with walls composed of the same shifting material as the passage. The first chamber was empty save for a pattern on the floor, bricks arranged in a spiral that precisely mirrored the one visible on the ceiling. The second chamber contained what appeared to be furniture, chairs, a table, a bed frame, all constructed entirely of brick, yet with the fluid quality of objects that might once have been upholstered. It was as if someone had created brick replicas of normal furniture, yet these possessed a disturbing organic quality, the surfaces undulating slightly, as if breathing. The third chamber, which I have just exited, contained what I first took to be statues. Closer examination revealed them to be human figures or representations thereof, composed entirely of brick. There were 7 in total, arranged in a circle facing inward. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, each figure captured in mid-motion, the brick somehow flowing to create the impression of cloth, hair, expressions of surprise or fear. The central figure, however, was different. While the others were clearly representations of humans, this one appeared to be in a state of transformation. The lower portion was recognizably human, but the upper body and head were dissolving, the bricks rearranging themselves into a form that resembled the wall patterns I had observed throughout the house. Most unsettling was my recognition of one of the figures. Though constructed entirely of brick, the features were unmistakably those of Millicent Hargrove, whose photograph I had seen in her bedroom. The brick figure wore the same high-collared dress visible in that image, and bore the same slight asymmetry in the shoulders. Yet the face held an expression never captured in any photograph, one of rapturous transformation, as if in the midst of some ecstatic experience. I am continuing deeper. The passage ahead appears to widen into a much larger chamber than those I have encountered thus far. I hear what sounds like voices, though they speak no language I recognize. The sound is more akin to the whisper of brick against brick, yet with the cadence of human speech. I see light ahead, not the yellow illumination of a lantern, but a dull red glow that reminds me of nothing so much as the inside of a kiln. I will describe what I find upon my return. Montgomery never emerged from the Hargrove mansion. When he failed to report to Hiram Blackwell after 4 days, a search party was organized. They found his camp outside the house undisturbed, with his surveying equipment neatly packed away. Inside the mansion, they discovered his journal on a table in the entrance hall, open to the final entry. A search of the cellar revealed only solid brick walls, with no sign of the passage or door Montgomery had described. One member of the search party, a local man named Jeremiah Watson, later claimed that as they were leaving the cellar, he observed what appeared to be a face pressing outward from within the brick wall, as if someone had been entombed there and was trying to push through. His companions saw nothing, and the incident was dismissed as an example of the superstitious fears that had long surrounded the property. The case attracted little attention at the time. Montgomery was unmarried and had no close family to press for a more thorough investigation. Blackwell, concerned primarily with the value of the property, attributed Montgomery's disappearance to desertion, suggesting that the surveyor had likely moved on to seek employment elsewhere, leaving his journal behind as some sort of elaborate hoax. The Hargrove mansion remained unoccupied, gradually falling into greater disrepair. The property might have been forgotten entirely had it not been for an incident that occurred in 1907. A group of 5 university students from Atlanta, having heard rumors of the haunted Hargrove Place, ventured to the property on a dare. Only 3 of the 5 students returned. Their account, given to the local sheriff and reported in the Meriwether County Gazette, described entering the, by then, collapsing mansion and discovering that the cellar walls appeared to be consuming their companions. The most coherent statement came from a student named Edward Parker, who was quoted in the newspaper. "We were exploring the cellar with kerosene lamps. Marcus was examining the brickwork in the northeast corner, running his hands over it and joking about secret passages. Suddenly, the bricks moved like they were liquid. He was pressed against the wall, and it just sort of opened up and pulled him in. The wall closed behind him like water settling. After something drops into it. We could hear him screaming for a moment, then silence. Richard tried to help him, started clawing at the wall where Marcus had disappeared, and the same thing happened. The bricks rippled and swallowed him. The wall never broke, never crumbled. It just absorbed them like they were sinking into mud, except it was solid brick." A subsequent search of the property by the sheriff's department found no evidence of the missing students, though they reported that the condition of the mansion had deteriorated to the point where it was hazardous to conduct a thorough investigation. The incident was ultimately dismissed as a prank gone wrong, with the missing students presumed to have orchestrated their own disappearances to perpetuate the house's sinister reputation. The final chapter in the documented history of the Hargrove Plantation came in 1916, when a developer purchased the property with the intention of demolishing the ruins of the mansion and subdividing the land for residential construction. According to records from the construction company contracted to perform the demolition, work began on June 7, 1916. The crew reported immediate difficulties with the brick portions of the structure, which they described as resistant to conventional demolition methods. The foreman's log from June 8 noted, "Dynamite charges placed yesterday failed to significantly damage the foundation or lower walls. The explosions appeared to be absorbed by the structure somehow. Sledgehammers make no impression on the bricks, which seem to yield slightly upon impact, but then return to their original form. We are attempting to dismantle the walls, brick by brick, but the mortar resists all efforts to separate the individual components. Most peculiar is the observation made by several workers that the bricks appear to move when not directly observed, rearranging themselves to repair any damage we managed to inflict." Work continued for several days with minimal progress. Then, on June 12th, a portion of the cellar wall collapsed unexpectedly, revealing what the foreman described as a space that could not possibly exist within the known dimensions of the foundation. His log entry continues. "The opening revealed a chamber at least 3 times larger than the cellar itself, extending beneath the ground, where no construction had ever taken place. The walls of this space were lined with the same red brick as the house, arranged in complex patterns that seemed to shift when viewed peripherally. Most disturbing was the floor of the chamber, which appeared to be composed of bricks laid in the shape of human figures, as if bodies had been pressed into the material and left their impressions. 3 workers entered this space to investigate and never emerged. The foreman immediately halted all work and withdrew his crew from the property. His final log entry reads, "Something dwells within those walls that defies rational explanation. The house is not merely a structure, it is something alive, something hungry. I have instructed all my men to stay clear of the property, and I am tendering my resignation to the development company, effective immediately. Some buildings were not meant to be demolished, some should be left to crumble on their own terms." The developer, facing financial pressure and unwilling to acknowledge the increasingly strange reports from the demolition crew, hired a new contractor to complete the work. This second attempt at demolition ended on the first day when a worker was reportedly absorbed into a brick wall while attempting to dislodge a section with a pickaxe.